morning, everybody. How is everyone out there today? Hope everybody's doing well and everything like that. First up, next week we are going to kick off Shark Week again. We're bringing it back. We've got some awesome shark talks coming up on Ocean Stories for next week. We're going to kick off the week with Dr. Mauricio Hoyas. He's one of the world's top great white shark experts. You might have seen him on Discovery Channel, Nat Geo, etc. Then on Tuesday, we kick off our new series, our new mini series called Coffee Break with shark conservationist Liz Parkinson to look at her human story behind some of the ocean heroes we've had on the show before. Then Thursday, we get into a little bit of that shark romance with Nat Geo explorer Tanya Palamete. And then on Friday, shark scientist Frida Lara is coming back to join us. With me and her are going to give a special talk together about the megalodon and some other kind of beautifully bizarre ancient sharks that once roamed our oceans. Then we're going to finish up Shark Week on May 9th with Dive Ninjas doing a special Project Aware shark conservation course online too. Also this Saturday, we've got a couple spots left in our coral reef conservation course, if you want to check that out. And on Sunday, we've got an equipment specialist course that's running on Sunday morning or early morning. Yeah, so lots of cool stuff. And tomorrow we've got Romina coming by to take us on a journey through Indonesia's macro life and give us some tips on macro photography and all these kind of cool things. But today we've got something super different, really, really special. It's something for me I've just more recently got into in this last year or so. It is an incredible world, something that is just mind-blowing. So we're going to take a journey into the world of Blackwater diving. Good morning, Richard. How you doing today, brother?
Hey, Jay, I'm good, man. How you doing?
Not too bad, not too bad. Ready to kick it off. So Richard is, he won Underwater Photographer of the Year recently, last year. He's won a ton of other awards. His photography work is incredible. He's also one of the founders of Unique Dive Expeditions out of Palau, and he's been exploring in Palau for over 10 years now. So without any further delay, let me hand it over to you. I'll stop sharing my screen so you can kick yours over and we'll get rocking.
All right. Okay, everyone, so I'm just going to screen share now. Okie dokie. Okay, let's start at the beginning here. All right, great. Okay, first of all, I just want to thank Jay for inviting me to talk about Blackwater diving and also the amazing job that he's doing with Ocean Stories, keeping us all entertained during the coronavirus. So I'm going to do a presentation about Blackwater diving in Palau. I just want to do a little bit of a twist on this and just seeing that we're doing Ocean Stories, just talk about what it takes to actually survive as a juvenile reef fish and actually make it back to the reef in one piece. This presentation is really going to start with what is Blackwater diving, how I got started doing it in Palau, and a bit about the concept, what it is, how we do it, and hopefully a few nice pictures of things that we actually see while we're doing these Blackwater dives. And then the story is just going to go on while I'm showing the pictures of what we're actually going to see, of, like I said, what it takes to actually survive as a larval fish, turning into a juvenile reef fish, and then making a way back to the reef. Okay, so how did I get introduced to Blackwater diving? Well, Jay briefly mentioned that I do Unique Dive Expeditions. I basically run that as a product with Sam's Tours, and we do lunar expeditions around the full moon and the new moon. We time these spawning events normally early in the morning to try to witness thousands of fish come together, reproduce, and then an offspring or a gamete will drift into the open ocean. And while we're doing that, we're kind of wondering what happens to these offspring. What's kind of stages? How do they make it back to the reef and their kind of life while they're out there? And this is what kind of got us interested in these kind of next stages of life and the development of these juvenile fish. While we're doing these spawning dives, we had a few famous photographers come through in the very beginning while we're doing these dives. One of them was called Gutsy Turson. He's a famous photographer from the Philippines, and he was actually doing a book all the way back in 2013. And while he was doing the spawning dive with us, he was like, hey man, you should check out this stuff I've recently been doing. I did a couple of dives in Hawaii, he explained the concept of blackwater diving, that you're jumping in the middle of the ocean at night time and then drifting along and checking out what you see. And I was like, wow, you know, first of all, I was like, are you nuts jumping in the middle of the ocean, you know, looking for macro stuff? But when he showed me the pictures of what he was actually getting, then I was, you know, pretty blown away by doing this. But it took me about a year of contemplating the idea and speaking to other people. And first of all, finding a few other crazy people to actually do this as well. So it took us until about 2014 before we actually started our first blackwater dive and experimenting with blackwater in Palau. So I've been talking about blackwater diving. What is blackwater diving? Well, it's still a relatively new diving experience. It's obviously at nighttime, and it's adapted to have different styles, which I'm going to talk a little bit about later on. But to put it in context, it's basically exploring mainly macro subjects away from the reef. You know, when we normally do a nice night dive on the reef, we're looking for those things that are hiding or maybe just come out at nighttime to photograph or have a look at. When we're doing a blackwater dive, we're actually turning away from the reef, or even a bonfire dive, turning away from the reef and looking for things in that kind of darkness away from the reef. The original concept, like I said, was actually invented in Hawaii. And, you know, when I first started talking about this, it was about 10 years ago, but now it's about 15 years ago or even longer than that. And their concept was basically driving a couple of miles, 3 or 4 miles offshore into the waters very deep, and basically doing a kind of a night dive, drift dive in the middle of the ocean. And they would tether people onto themselves, onto the boat, and then you would drift in about, you know, 15, 20, 30 feet of water, drifting through the ocean. Now, you know, when people started telling me, like, why would you do this? Like, yeah, there better be something good if you're going to jump in the middle of the ocean to actually, you know, get me to jump, you know, at night time to do this. So what you're actually witnessing is it's the largest migration of animals on the planet, and this stuff happens every single night. The main concept is to see life forms rising from the mesopelagic zone, which is basically thousands of feet down, up to the epipelagic zone, close to the surface, 3 or 4 or 5 meters close to the surface. And they estimate that about 100 million tons of biomass is actually migrating to the surface each and every single night. So if you look at this kind of small diagram here, you can see 1,000 meters or so, which is the bathypelagic zone, where things are obviously where light cannot go during the daytime. It's dark down there. Things are hiding down there in the daytime. And as the night is falling, these things are rising up past the mesopelagic zone, up into that 5, 6, 7 meter layer called the epipelagic zone, where obviously at nighttime we're going to be waiting to photograph whatever is swimming around with us. And this just gives you a kind of example of what we could possibly see. A lot of people ask me, their first few questions are, how big is the stuff they're actually seeing? Well, if you look at a squid, the first one in front of us here, that can be, you know, 2 or 3 inches or even a little bit bigger than that. Some of the very small stuff can only be a couple of centimeters, 2 or 3 centimeters. But some of the larger stuff, a couple of inches, or that kind of stuff. So that's the kind of size difference that we're looking at here. So to get an example, there's a diamond squid in the middle. You have a nice pelagic paper Nautilus, which I'll talk about a little bit more. Some pygmy squids, some nice cephalopods, lots and lots of different stuff to see out there. Well, I talk about them briefly vertically migrating, so staying down in that deep mesopelagic zone and then migrating close to the surface. Well, why would you do this? Some of these things, or most of these things, are basically post-larval, very, very small. And so their defense mechanism is to stay deep during these daylight hours away from predators. At nighttime, they're going to start rising close to the surface. And the reason why they're doing this is to feed on nutrient-rich water, which is closer to the surface in that water column. And they're going to take advantage of respiring and high oxygen concentrations. And obviously not the juvenile fish, but if there's other things around like the cephalopods, and there's a lot of them, they might take the opportunity to reproduce. So you have a whole variety of things going on up in that shallow water column. Again, I can see a lot of people secretly laughing at my my artist skills here. But But this is basically how we do this open ocean night drifting. So in Palau, you have to drive maybe 20 or 30 minutes on the east side until you get some nice 1,000, 2,000 meter water. And once we get there, we have a trapeze, which we built, which goes down to about 12 meters or about 36 feet. And on the end of this trapeze will be our lights. We try to have as bright lights as you can get. You don't need, you know, super bright lights, but the more powerful, the better. And they will basically be shining down at around about 12 meters. And then we'll have another bar at 9 meters, another bar at 6 meters. And the idea behind this is that we're going to be swimming around as the boat is drifting with the wind and with the current. We're obviously staying very, very close to that boat, and we're drifting with that light area and waiting for things to be attracted to those lights. The dive can be about 60 to 90 minutes because the maximum dive that we do sometimes is, you know, 12 meters, 36, maybe even 20 meters just for a brief few seconds then, but mainly coming up to 12 meters. And what those lights are doing is not only are they attracting copepods and isopods, plankton, which is in turn attracting other things like a food chain, but it's also a visual reference for us when we're swimming around. Now, some people like to be tethered, so you'll have a line which is attached to the boat, and that obviously is only about 20 or 60 feet, or less than that, sorry, 30 or 40 feet in length, and that will keep you drifting with the boat. But those people that will be doing it for quite a long time, they don't like to be tethered, so they can move around a little bit more. So those lights really keep a visual reference for, you know, how deep you're going and keeping your buoyancy kind of level when you're swimming around like that. Okay, the good stuff. What can you actually see? Now you can see a lot. This is only going to be a 20-30 minute presentation, so I kind of broke it down into 4 main things. Post-Larval stages, which is the transparent fish, obviously not had much coloration. The stages before it actually returns back to the reef, so the stages before the juveniles. We still do get to see some juveniles that have already got some coloration, especially when you do bonfire diving, because these guys have already returned back to the reef. But generally, the juveniles should have already settled or begin settling. So once they've got that full coloration that their parents would, then they should have already kind of been settling down. Gelatinous animals, things that we don't normally look at during the daytime, so salps, jellyfish, all the kind of transparent stuff that's swimming around. And they're basically eating these juvenile larval fish that's around there. And then one of my favorite things to photograph is the cephalopods, the squids, the pelagic squids, the paper nautilus, and all those kind of rare things that you see when you're swimming out there that you generally don't see when you're near the reef. Okay, so for me, my favorite thing about Blackwater diving is the larval fish and the changes and the mutations that they go through. And so for me, Blackwater diving is really the first stages of life, the insight into what really happens to them before they return to the reef. When I first started diving, we have these amazing fish ID books that Joel Allen, Roger Steen, Paul Humane, Ned DeLope have actually done for us to check out, you know, what the adults look like, what the juveniles look like, and a little bit about their diversity. For this type of stuff, there wasn't so much information out there and nice pictures. So it's kind of hard to kind of work out exactly what these things were in the beginning. But yeah, for me, this is what I really like about Blackwater diving, is these insights into the first stages of life, the life before they really actually reach the reef. And I'm going to talk about a little bit about some of these changes and mutations and adaptations that they go to be able to actually survive living and making it back. Okay, so a little bit about what I do. I'm interested in spawning aggregations, and so this is a little bit about what happens to the post-larval fish. So a spawning happens when this is a bumphead parrotfish early in the morning. They've come together, thousands of them, and when they're ready to spawn, the heads will turn white. They'll rise close to the surface and release this nice cloud of milk, which is gametes, fertilized eggs, sperm, and niggas come together and form these gametes. And this basically happens on an outgoing tide. Why would this happen on an outgoing tide? Because if this happened on an incoming tide, you'd have a lot of reef fish that be eating those young offspring straight away in the beginning, which would be very bad. So these outgoing tides are taking these gametes, these offspring, out into the open ocean for their first stage of pelagic life, which we're obviously later on going to be doing for our blackwater diving. Now, this process needs to be extremely fast, and I just want to talk a little bit about this because it gives an idea of how amazing and how fast this needs to happen for these juvenile and larval reef fish. So as soon as they're born, they're basically being attacked by predators. This is the bowhead snapper. This happens around full moon, different to the bumphead parrotfish, which is around new moon, but the same kind of thing. Early in the morning, thousands of fish will gather, rise close to the surface to spawn, and then you'll have these black snappers up near here, which are basically feeding on all this protein and all these freshly born gametes. Now this outgoing current is going to take this larva away from these predators and take them out into the open ocean. To give you some idea of how fast this needs to happen, this is the gamete, fertilized egg, and this is 10 hours after spawning. So you can see basically how fast this needs to happen. To give you an idea, if I basically caught that cloud of sperm and eggs that was in the water and I put this into a cup, did my normal day's activities, then the next day we would basically be able to see that fish swimming around. That's how fast that this process actually needs to happen. So yeah. So 10 hours, this picture here basically is showing 10 hours after spawning. The head is already starting to form here. You can see the tail coming up here as well, and some nice formation that's already going on here. Okay, now going on to larval stages. Now, I've talked about the gamete very, very quickly. This is basically weeks or months after spawning. It's going to be in the pelagic stage, and most of these guys are actually transparent. Sorry guys, just hold on a second. I just want to try to get rid of this here. Okay, great, back. Okay, sorry about that. So now we're going on to larval stages. Now this is what we can actually see with our own eyes. That stage that I was just talking about earlier is obviously so small that you can't really see that. So I just wanted to talk about the growth rate, and actually now they're actually at a larval stage and we can see these guys for our own eyes. To give you an idea of what we're looking at, this is a kind of surgeon fish. The first picture, over to the right hand side, you'll have a grouper, the kind of spiky dorsal coming at the top, have a lionfish going on here, and a lanternfish or a cardinal fish going on down here. So these are weeks or potentially months after spawning, still living in the pelagic stage, transparent. And what amazes me about this is each species has different variations of growth rates and depends on how long they will stay in the open ocean. This is a post-larval surgeon fish, so I'm just going to go through a few pictures of these kind of larval fish. These guys swim very, very fast, so it's hard to get actually a nice picture of them. In the beginning, I would see them zooming by and I would just kind of give up. But slowly you would have some that come into the camera, just stop for a couple of seconds. Maybe they're kind of blinded by the lights, and then you can snap away at a few nice pictures. I love this kind of stage because it's completely transparent. You know, you can see the spine going off through the back. The head has started to take some kind of coloration, kind of cute big eyes swimming around. This is a post-larval eel, possibly a moray eel, not quite sure. This kind of defense mechanism, other than staying deep during the daytime and coming close to the surface at nighttime, is to wrap its body around in its head. So you can kind of be swimming around, seeing these guys getting quite close, and when they feel threatened, they'll just wrap their head up in their body like this and kind of stop for a few seconds before you can try to get a kind of nice picture. Okay, again, a nice transparent body. This is a post-larval mackerel. A lot of these things that you can identify just by the shape of the head. In the very, very beginning, they all look the kind of same. But as they start to grow and get slightly bigger, still without any coloration, still transparent, you can see the kind of head here, the teeth kind of getting this look as well. So I would say this was a post-larval mackerel. Now, some things when you're doing the Blackwater dive, you've never actually seen on a regular night dive, or you never even knew existed in Palau. These were juvenile flying gurnards. I had never seen one before I'd done this Blackwater dive, but I had seen them in the Philippines and Indonesia. And these guys generally live most of their life on the sand. This was during a Blackwater dive, one out in the open ocean. And this guy was swimming around at about 10 or 15 meters, 35 or 40 feet. Really kind of nice size, maybe 5 or 6 centimeters. So yeah, spent most of the dive with us. So kind of special that you see things that you've never seen before in the adult phase that you're seeing in the kind of juvenile or post-larval stage. When I was talking about we're using lights to attract this larval stuff, if you look in the very middle of the picture, you can see a isopod or a copepod. This is what is the kind of plankton that's being attracted to the lights in the first place. And the food chain, the food reaction is obviously happening, that these post-larval blennies and all the other post-larval fish are actually coming out and eating these isopods and copepods, and in turn other things are coming out to try to eat obviously the larval fish that's eating that. So maybe the cephalopods you'll have coming out, the squids trying to eat one of them, maybe one of the gelatinous animals. For the smaller post-larval fish, it's doing that. So it's quite interesting. Now in this picture you can see different kind of stages. A lot of these pictures that I'm showing are not one image, these are a composite, so it's 3 images put together. And here you have a quite late stage of the blennies. So the coloration has already happened here. The face is still transparent, but if you look to the top right hand side, you can see a blenny that hasn't got much coloration on the body. It's just started to get some coloration. So obviously as the first stages of their life, they're completely transparent. And as they start to make their way back to the reef, which they can smell and by sound, they start to get some coloration coming to their body. And when they start settling more and more and more, then they'll obviously have full coloration and resemble what their adults look like. So one thing that I was really interested in when I first started doing this is how long do these things stay out in the open ocean? You know, do they all stay out there for a month, 2 months, and they all make their way back to the reef? Well, no, every species is different. Some species can stay out there for, 10, 15, 20 days and make their way back to the reef, while others can stay out there or have to stay out there for 300 days or even a year. And that really interested me, like how can some fish come, or why are some fish coming back early than others? And what I kind of found was that, or what I started to research was that different species have different kind of defense mechanisms. So to give you an example, one that we all like to photograph and we've all seen before, this is a juvenile holocone sweetlips. When you've seen these little guys, they normally live in kind of rocky areas when they're young, and you'll see them swimming really, really fast, like up and down. And that's what normally catches your attention. Like, my God, why is this fish swimming so fast, crazy like this? Well, what it's trying to do, they say, is it's trying to mimic a flatworm. And the reason it's trying to mimic a flatworm is because flatworms are poisonous. And so therefore, if it mimics this flatworm and a fish sees that, then obviously it's going to leave it alone. So therefore, by having this kind of defense mechanism, this early strategy, it can make its way back to the reef young at about 15 days, only spent in the pelagic stage, and then already making its way back to the reef. And so you can see by this picture, it's about 20 days old. It's only about 1 centimeter. But it's already got some coloration into the body. That's because I found this already back on the reef. This was not taken during a Blackwater dive. The other picture close to it is about 40 days, so it's grown a bit more. Still swimming around like mad. It's about 5 centimeters in size, so a little bit bigger, nice size to photograph. So these guys basically settle really, really fast. Their pelagic life is not so long because of this defense mechanism. If you look on the other end of the scale, then you're looking at things like juvenile Moorish idol. Now, juvenile Moorish idol looks like this. Sorry, an adult Moorish idol looks like this. This is when they're again in a spawning aggregation going up and down the reef. But in the beginning, I thought that these guys stayed in pairs. I'd never really seen a huge aggregation like this, which is something I'll talk about later. But these guys here, when they're in the pelagic stage, they have to stay in the open ocean for about 300 or so days, sometimes even 320 days. So when you see these guys, they're already about the same size as one of their adults. like these guys here. The reason why they have to stay out there for so long is because they don't really have this defense mechanism. So their chance of survival is much greater out in the open ocean, where they can grow and grow and grow, get big enough. And then when they make their way back and they're a large enough size, things will generally leave them alone and they can start to settle once they've already made their way back to the reef. So I took this on a bonfire dive, which I'm going to talk about the difference a little bit later on. But again, you can start to see this is just about starting to get settled. Some coloration has come back here. Normally these fish are, you know, yellow, white and black like this with a stripe, and you can start to see the stripe and the coloration is just about to start happening. What fascinates me the most really is these mutations and changes that these things have to go through, or these larval fish have to go through to make it to their kind of juvenile stages. Now, a nice example is a flounder. We've all seen, most of us seen flounders on a dive. On the right-hand side, it's still kind of transparent, but you can see that both eyes are on the top of its head, and this fish lives on the bottom. Okay, it normally hides itself in sand, and when you see it, it's kind of swimming really, really fast on the bottom like this. Now, when it lives in the open ocean, it makes no sense for its eye to obviously be on top of its head like it is on the right-hand side picture there. Okay, so this is when it's swimming around in the pelagic stage. Its eye is actually now on either side of its body. And the reason why is because when it's swimming in the open ocean, feeding on stuff, it doesn't make sense, obviously, for its eye to be on top of its body. So what happens is when it starts to actually get close to the reef and it starts to adapt and change, the eye, which you can see is on either side of the body on the left-hand picture here, starts to migrate through the body and pop out on the other side. And now you can see the fish is actually going to start swimming along, not on its side anymore, it's now swimming along the bottom, and that eye has migrated through the top of the body. So then obviously when it's living on the bottom, it has both its eyes on top to catch its prey. So it's just amazing to see these changes that they have to go to adapt, you know. It needs its survival and food source like this. So this is how it survives. And when it's going to be changing to the reef fish, it's obviously migrating and changing like this. Again, this is a mid-phase, so you can actually see the kind of eye migrating a tiny bit through the body on these pictures here. It hasn't completely finished, but on the picture on the right-hand side, you can see it's just over the top of the head like this, and then coming together. So it's quite cool, but the coloration has already come back on this fish. Okay, Stromatopods, Mantis Shrimps. These guys go through 4 kind of stages. The very first one, with its arms hanging out, doesn't really represent what we know as a mantis shrimp. So mantis shrimps live in the nice big holes like this. The last picture kind of shows its elongated body. It's kind of ready to get settled and live in that hole. But in the beginning photo, you can see it, the body is actually a little bit shorter, and it mainly swims around in the open ocean, eating its copepods and isopods that are swimming around like this as it starts to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And the final picture, and that final picture is not that long away from settlement, even though it hasn't got much coloration. It shouldn't be that much longer before it comes back to the reef. What also fascinates me about doing the Blackwater diving and understanding about the larval stuff is that, you know, not only is it the kind of ocean-going creatures that they're using the Blackwater or the open ocean for nursery, but it's also things like crabs, land crabs, for instance. So land crabs will basically lay their offspring around about a full moon in Palau in the ocean. So they'll manage to walk their way down onto a close beach or anywhere that's near the ocean, and then they'll basically shake their body and then let all the eggs and larvae come out into the open ocean, into the water. And that will now start its first day of survival living in the open ocean in the water. And as it starts to get bigger, it'll start to change. This is the megalogue stage. So this is the kind of last stage that it gets before it could potentially get a bit larger and then make its way back onto land. So, you know, some of these crabs are actually living on land, living in the ocean in the first place, and then making their way back onto land, which is quite amazing. So life as a post-larval fish is pretty hard, because not only have you got all these predators that are trying to eat you as soon as you're born, the black snappers, but you've also got these gelatinous animals, which is basically predators everywhere for these guys. You've got some salps, you've got some line mains there, and then you've got some box jellyfish as well. These guys are kind of beautiful, and in the daytime, you know, you might not pay so much attention to them, but at nighttime, they really kind of stand out. And if you're extremely lucky or generally unlucky for the larval fish, you can sometimes see that some of these guys are actually eating these larval fish that are swimming around. Now, not everything wants to eat you when it's out there. You might have these ctenophores, and I like this kind of picture because it looks like a crustacean. You can see these two crustaceans here actually like riding, it looks like a hot air balloon that's kind of drifting through the ocean. So if you're a larval fish, not everything wants to eat you, but there's a lot of stuff out there that obviously does. This is a nice ctenophore. You'll see that swimming along, nice kind of size, like 2 or 3 or 4 centimeters, sometimes an inch in size. Pulsates, all these kind of cilia and lights coming through as it's swimming through, really look kind of from the deep, like alien species. This is a larva of a benthic snail. The first picture is like a side-on picture, and this is how you normally see them when you're doing a Blackwater. You kind of get to see these guys most nights, especially on a bonfire near the reef dive. And the other picture is from underneath. So what these guys do is they'll be on the bottom during the daytime, but then they'll come out hovering in the water column and actually extend these arms out like this and feed on the plankton that's coming by. So you'll see them feeding on this, and then they'll keep them in their mouth and then bring them out again, feeding them out. So these are quite beautiful to see, quite small in size as well. And an anemone polyp that's drifting out in the open ocean, pretty beautiful. All the colors that's coming off there as well. And this will obviously grow to a certain size, and then the currents will slowly start bringing it back to the reef where it's settled. These are quite nice to photograph. These are sea butterflies, basically swimming sea slugs. This one was quite large, maybe 6 inches or so, just wafting slowly, drifting slowly in the current. And then you'll have things out there that you have no idea what they are at all. Aliens from the deep, which Jay liked to kind of call this talk anyway. When I first saw these guys, this is really small. It's about 3 or so centimeters, 2 centimeters in size. It's spinning around as fast as it can. It looks exactly like some kind of UFO that you'd expect to see. And I never really got some nice images in the beginning because it was swimming too fast, it's too small. This one's okay, but it really gives you a nice idea of the kind of colors it's pulsating and kind of things that you can see out there. Another kind of alien from the deep. Again, I have no idea what this is. Sometimes you can have things inside it. But yeah, again, beautiful colors and things that are drifting. Okay, something that I do like to actually see is hitchhiking, and that's basically crustaceans and larval fish that are actually using some of these jellyfish for protection and development and, you know, transport back to the reef. So not everything will actually kill them. Some of these will actually protect them and help have a kind of symbiotic relationship here. So the top right-hand one, you've got a small kind of jack, post-larval jack, that's using one of these jellyfish, probably hiding in it as well for transportation as well and food source. So lots of stuff like that. Yeah. In the beginning, we didn't actually know, we thought this was a mini bobtail squid. But later we found out this is actually a male paper nautilus that's riding on some kind of ctenophore jelly that's drifting in the ocean. These guys are really, really small. And again, when you do see these gelatinous animals that's drifting there, it's really, really nice idea to just go and have a closer look at what actually is going on there. Because sometimes you do have a nice surprise and can see some of these guys actually attached to it. So those are the things that really don't attack the larval fish, and these are the things that do. If you are a larval fish, these guys, to see one of these at nighttime is extremely bad. This is a Cephalopods. It's a salp. These guys are made up of lots of different individual guys, and they can make one organ between themselves. And what they do is this red part in the head, where you can see there, extends out into these kind of huge fishing net, webbing nets. And they catch these fish larvae in these nets and then bring them closer in and then digest them in here. So here you can see a feeding Cephalopods that's going on around there. And of course, if you're a juvenile fish, it's an unlucky day for you in there. The other thing that's quite cool is Cephalopods, which I talked about earlier. I've shown a few pictures. I think these are most people's favorites to photograph, especially me. The beauty about doing blackwater diving with these guys is that you do get some species which only live in the open ocean. They're a pelagic cephalopod like the paper Nautilus, which we're going to see in a little bit of time. And these guys are basically predating, as well as the gelatinous animals, on these larval fish that's there. These are pelagic squids. These were one of the first kind of squids that we saw when we were swimming around and doing the blackwater dive. You'd see maybe a school of like 20 or 30 of them, and they'd hang out just below the lights. And when you're drifting, it'd be quite unnerving because you would see like the school come in, maybe ink at something, and then dart off again. And you were like, what was just chasing that? And then they come back in, ink a little bit more, and then swim off. And in the beginning, we were like, wow, these guys are amazing hunters. You know, they're basically eating a lot of the larval fish that's swimming around. It wasn't until later that we actually realized that they're eating themselves as well. So not only were they eating the larval fish that's there, but they're also attacking anything that was eating the other larval fish. So it's quite amazing. You can get some pictures of actually, you know, one with a juvenile fish in its mouth, maybe being eaten by another one. And they'd form these big clouds that would like drift in and out of the dive when you're doing it. This is one of my favorite things to photograph. It's a diamond squid. You don't see so many of these. I've seen about 3 or 4 while I've been doing this dive. They're kind of nice size, maybe 4 or 5 inches. And you don't really understand the beauty of these until you come back and look at your photos. It's like a lot of critters on these dives, you know. They're quite small and you'll take photos, but you don't really understand how beautiful they are until you come back and look at these images. And when I put up this image and I saw how this webbing started to come, the different colorations that it could change into when it was felt threatened or just displaying these different colors was just absolutely fascinating. So one of my favorite things to photograph on these dives. Bobtail squids. These guys generally hide in the sand during the daytime. At nighttime, they come out to feed. So we have more of a chance to see these on a bonfire dive, not drifting out in the middle of the ocean, but actually doing it a little bit closer to the reef. That doesn't mean that you can't see them out in the open ocean. Like I said, we just stand more chance of seeing them when there is a sandy area where these guys like to hide. But I just love the colors that they can show. They're a nice size as well. It's a mini ping pong ball. And they don't really move that fast, unlike these guys who move quite fast. These are Pygmy Squids. They're extremely small. They're quite hard to photograph. Again, this is a composite image, like most of them, 2 images together. And yeah, these guys like to swim around fast. So it's quite hard to actually get one to stay right in position in the front of your camera. But if you do it enough, obviously, you can get some nice images. And you see these guys also eating, this is it, eating a Stromatopod Mantis Shrimp, just hanging around the lights and then grabbing whatever's coming by. And one of my favorite things as well, a long tentacle octopus. The most I've photographed this has been on a bonfire dive as well, when it's already settled. Most of the time I've seen it living in the sand during the daytime, or I've never seen it out during the daytime. And then at nighttime during a bonfire dive, I've seen it coming out. Sometimes if it feels threatened, it actually will dart down into the sand and you actually see it burying itself into the sand. So that's one of the reasons how we know that this guy lives in the sand during the daytime. But again, really, really beautiful, you know, nice small body, little eye, but these long kind of arms that's coming out and kind of hovering and wafting in the water. Really beautiful to photograph. Okay, paper Nautilus. Now, when you do blackwater diving, there's obviously a few things which are the white elephants, the white rhinos, like, you know, things that are really, really rare and that people really, really want to photograph. We got a lot of our information from the guys in Hawaii because they were the first kind of people that were doing it commercially. So we'd see photos that they got and then obviously try to find that or kind of identify it by what they'd seen. So I remember they asked Josh Lambus, who'd been doing blackwater for a long time, they'd asked him, what's the thing you'd most like to photograph that you haven't seen before? And he'd done about 2,000 blackwater dives or so, and he said a paper Nautilus. Now, I'd never heard of a paper Nautilus up until that point. So I went and had a look online, saw what it looked like, looked amazing. Obviously really wanted to see one, and it was literally 2 days later that we jumped in to do a Blackwater dive. I think it was in May. And within the first 25 minutes, I saw something on a blade of grass drifting by. And as I got closer, I just was freaking out. I knew exactly what it was. It was the paper nautilus. So I was shouting through my reg. Everyone came close and had a look at it. And yeah, paper nautilus is a pelagic octopus. It basically has this egg sac casing on the back here, which looks like a shell, which it hides in. And this is a female. The male, which I showed a picture of earlier, very, very small. Females are generally much, much bigger. And yeah, just a beautiful creature to be able to photograph. And you never really see that many of them in Palau anyway. So yeah, really, really nice to see one of these guys. This is just to show, obviously, you know, what they look at in different positions. Composite image, this is 3 images again put together just to show what it looks like on the side and in front of you. But really, really beautiful the way it can kind of flash those colors and just look beautiful. Okay, so coming to near the end of the presentation, if the larval fish is lucky enough to go through all of that and make itself back to the reef, this is what it's going to start to look like, the early stages of their adult parents. Can still be pelagic, but obviously it's going to hopefully be a lot closer to the reef, especially if it started to have some kind of color changes, as you can see here, but a lot smaller than their adults, but kind of still resembling what you should see later on. Coloration has come back, and then now they're entering, a bit like when the flounder starts settling on the bottom, they're entering their new stage of life. Maybe they're going to be eating something slightly different, hiding under a rock, which they wouldn't be doing in the open ocean. And they're going to be looking, the reason why I put these fish ID books below was basically now they're going to start to at least have some kind of similarity in those books to what they would look like later on and what they will look like when they become adults. I just want to finish the presentation by talking about bonfire diving. You're going to hear, if you're into Blackwater diving, you'll hear a lot of people talking about bonfire diving. The difference from bonfire diving to Blackwater diving is that Blackwater diving is drifting in the open ocean where the water is very, very deep. You can't see the bottom, and you're basically drifting with the current and the wind. We started to have problems doing that in Palau. The weather picks up a bit. It's very hard to do a Blackwater dive when the wind is about 20 knots because you're continuously either being dragged by the boat or chasing the boat. So it makes a dive very, unenjoyable. So we had to start experimenting and trying to find different spots. Inside the lagoon was basically the only kind of area that was sheltered enough to be able to do it. So we go to a wreck, an artificial reef, and we just tie up on that, hang the lights down and do the dive exactly the same, except this time it was stationary, not drifting. And we actually got some really, really good results. You're not going to get that deep, scientifically weird, very, very rare stuff, but you are still going to get a lot of cool developed juveniles, post-larval stuff, even things that you don't see in the daytime because they really, hiding very, very deep in the coral heads are starting to come out and feed around those lights. So, you can experiment with Blackwater diving and bonfire diving in these sheltered areas, as much as possible. And I would highly recommend, experimenting with these. And Jay back in Carbo is doing the same kind of thing. Sandy areas that you can see coral heads, that things can hide in the daytime, might be a nice place to try it. Little places with a little bit of current, but not too much current. And just keep trying to do these spots. Sometimes you'll have good times and they'll be really, really good. And other times you might try a spot that is not so good, but the moon plays a big part in these dives as well. If you have a full moon, there's a lot of light out, so you don't get so much activity. The creatures are maybe staying a lot deeper, especially for the true Blackwater. But for a new moon, when the moon is black and there's not so much light out, we've been having a lot more success during those times. So, if you do get the opportunity to try it, do try different places. Open ocean drifting is obviously the main one to try, but, try to find these sheltered areas and check out what you see. Every time you do it, that's the beauty of Blackwater. You never really know what you're going to get. Okay, guys, so I'd just like to stop the presentation there and thank everyone very much for tuning in, and Jay. And
awesome, man. Very good. Really interesting stuff. I still just, I find Blackwater so mind-blowing. It's just really, really incredible.
Cool, mate.
Super, super cool. So guys, let's, if you've got any questions or anything like that, you can pop them in the Q&A box. We've got already a bunch of them coming in. So let me just get this open and we'll rock and roll. Awesome. So here we go. So Ro asks, how do you photograph these tiny animals?
That is a very good question. So the key for me personally is the depth of field that you've got. So I use a 16mm. If you use if you're using a compact camera, it's quite hard because the focusing, or a mirrorless, the focusing is trying to find the subject. So DSLR camera really helps. And the difference between using a 60 and a 105 makes a big difference as well, because with a 105, the depth of field, is so much further out there, it's hard to find that subject. So what I'm using is a 60mm, which gives me a lot more room to be able to find the subject. And when I see the subject, I'm getting closer and closer and closer and closer, and then trying to photograph like that. Using a diopter is hard because that's limiting your depth of field. So having, a lot of megapixels can help you crop down, the image. A lot of people don't like doing that, but sometimes it's the only way that you can get a picture of it because it's moving so fast.
Awesome. Yeah, I find it's a very difficult type of photography.
Yeah.
Like, when I, first tried, I don't know how many times of trying that I got absolutely nothing. It's just it is skill. Like, it is definitely an incredible skill.
It's like 3D macro, when you're taking a nice macro image, you normally have time to settle down, or at least to have an idea of how you want things and try to be artistic and move this. Mm-hmm. With the Blackwater, it's happening, and whether you get the shot or not. So, you just try to take as many as you can. And hopefully you'll get a nice image of it, like all in focus, looking right at you.
No, it's nuts. It's like shooting pelagic animals, like when we go out for, marlin or makos or whatever, but they're like this big. So it's like, it is a test of buoyancy, a test of photography skill. It is definitely crazy. So Pilar asks, she says, amazing pictures. What underwater camera do you recommend for Blackwater diving?
I would personally recommend the Nikon D500. I think that the focusing is very, very fast. I'm using a D850 full frame because I mainly shoot wide angle stuff. But then, having those megapixels certainly helps. But yeah, I would use either a D850 or D800 or D500. You have that little crop factor, which helps a little bit, which is 1.4, bigger than a full frame. So if you can, I would just recommend that camera.
Yeah, I find what I really like with my Sony, with the Alpha, is that, like, being able to essentially switch the sensor to being a crop or whatever, that gives me that extra distance that I don't normally get with the full frame. Yeah. I find that really a bit beneficial. A little cheating, but
yeah. I've never shot with a mirrorless, but I've the autofocus is getting better and better and better and better and better, and so I think that now, Blackwater is I've seen a lot of good images with people with mirrorless cameras in Blackwater. In the beginning, it's very frustrating. You're trying to take a picture, the focusing isn't getting it, and it's all about luck, I think, with them.
Yeah, it is, like I said before, it's for me, like, going from shooting, like pelagics and big animals, and then trying to shoot this. And I've shot a bit of mackerel here and there. But that was the most challenging and frustrating photography I've ever done. You spend an entire dive, you fire off God knows how many hundreds of shots, and in the end you have nothing, and you're just like, what is this? Like,
totally.
It's difficult. But once you start to pick up, like, the stuff you were teaching me, you guys, you and Ace and them, like, and all that, and starting to put that together with it, it starts to, all make sense and starts to get a little bit easier.
And then, you just get a couple of images that look, they really stand out, and it makes the whole dive worth it, because, you walked away with a couple of images that you're super happy with.
No. That's awesome. So Faye says, absolutely fascinating. Thank you. Do the lights from the boat and illuminating the juveniles cause them to be, say, highlighted or eaten by bigger fish?
I would say, well, no and yes. For some things, the light, of course, is attracting them. It's attracting the copepods and the isopods. but then some of them are so fast moving that, you know, that they're actually have their own survival technique anyway, that they don't all get eaten. You know, you don't, put it this way, when you're doing the Blackwater dive with the lights, you're not always seeing predation happening the whole time, you know. So I would say that the lights are definitely giving them an advantage, but everything's not getting wiped out the whole time that you're doing it.
Yeah. Awesome. So Caesar asks, he says, hi, mind-blowing topic and presentation. Besides Palau and Hawaii, in what other places would you recommend to practice Blackwater diving? I'm asking because I suppose you might be able to find more Blackwater sites at like areas that have a constant upwelling.
Yeah, exactly. That's a very good question. Thank you very much for the comments or the photos. Yeah, you know, there's so many places that are doing it. You know, Philippines is got, in Palau has got some great, we've seen some great things coming out from there now. You've got Lembeh, Indonesia, some great stuff coming out there as well. I think there's so many places which are doing it now, that everyone's getting to see, you know, what kind of the highlights of these different places. For me, I do think that you need a bit of current to bring in this kind of, you know, when you're doing a Blackwater dive, for instance, it could be a little bit slow for about 10 or so minutes, and then you'll have like, you know, 10 or 15 minutes of pure action and lots of things coming through. So it needs some current to be drifting things in, and definitely an upwelling is exactly what you need. You know, you need that upwelling of plankton nutrients and everything to be there. So you'll certainly have these hotspot areas. So that's why I was saying you've got to keep trying it in different places. You know, when you're doing a Blackwater dive, you're just drifting. So sometimes you're coming into these places, sometimes you're not. But when you're doing the kind of bonfire place, some places are going to be great, some places aren't, depending on, you know, if it's going to be, if there's enough current, if there's too much current, everything like that. So I would recommend doing it anywhere you can. You know, Hawaii, Philippines, Indonesia, a lot of the things they see are going to be the same, but a lot of cool stuff is going to be different. Mm-hmm. So, you know, you should take any opportunity to do it as many places as you can.
Awesome.
And like you said, it's hard taking photos. So the more you can do it, the better you start to get.
Exactly. So Coral says, thanks for the great sharing. Just two questions. One, what are some of the dangers of Blackwater diving? Like, would you be able to keep an eye on your team?
That's a good question as well. So when we first started to do it, you know, we weren't using a tether because we wanted to have the freedom, you know, swimming around. And plus, you know, the people that we were doing it with were kind of all professionals anyway. When we actually started doing it with Jax and some guys from Hawaii, they were like, guys, you've got to be crazy not to use lines, you know, because if you're offering it to guests, you know, not everyone's buoyancy is, you know, is as good as people who have done thousands of dives. So, so it's nice to have that line to make you feel more secure, especially as a dive guide when you're offering it to customers. And also you have the light that's there swimming around as well. But then obviously having lines hanging down the boat can make people feel, you know, like they might get tangled up. So we always have a couple of guides in the water, and one of the jobs of the guide is to make sure that people don't get tangled up. And the other job is obviously to try to find subjects for people. And then we have things like, you know, people always ask about sharks turning up. So if something turns up that we don't like the behavior of it, then we just do a 3-call bang, and then people will slowly get out of the water. Other than that, I would just say the depth that you've got to be at. You know, you see a subject that's really cool, and then of course it wants to start going down into the depths. You just got to make sure that you don't keep following it, because if you turn around and then you see the light, a very, very small light, you know, then you know that you've obviously gone a little bit too far. So, but, you know, we always have a limit of 60 feet or 20 meters. There's no need to go deeper than that. Everything is rising closer to the surface. So if we see anyone drifting down, then obviously we're right there to make sure that they're safe.
Awesome. And her second question asks, do the lights affect the fishes, like for their eyes? Like, does it blind them or attract them or scare them or anything?
Yeah, I would say that it attracts some of the species of light, but some other things are actually scared of the light. So, you know, different shops have done different techniques. Some shops don't use lights at all, and they just drift in, you know, the open ocean. You know, the chance that I haven't done it that way. I like to use lights because sometimes I think it increases your chance to see things. But like I said, I don't think that it blinds stuff enough to actually, you know, kill a lot of stuff that's around. So I think that, you know, using lights helps us. We only have an hour or so under the water. So we want to try to see as much as possible. But like I said, if a lot of stuff was getting eaten in front of me and I felt bad, then obviously, you know, I would use less light or something like that.
Awesome. So Jose asks, he says, amazing images, Richard. Have you ever used nets to catch the small larvae for imaging under a microscope? And do you have any insight into how some of the creatures find their way from the open ocean back to the reef?
Oh, Jose, good question. Thank you. No, I haven't really caught anything with a net because I'm so terrified that it's gonna, you know, it's gonna be destroyed. You know, a lot of those things out there, they don't see a bottom, and so you know, a lot of them are quite delicate. If you caught them in a net, you do risk the chance of destroying them. So you know, I have seen some people do some research on them, and they've caught them in like a little glass jar that you would do. But you know, the kind of stages that we're looking at already a nice kind of size to take a picture of with a 60mm or so. So you don't really need to go back and do the microscope stuff. I mean, the gametes I did with a microscope because that's obviously so small. But then, yeah, other than that, no, I've never really done that before.
All right.
What was the other part of that question? Because it was the first part.
Do you have any insight into how some of these creatures make their way from the open ocean back to the reef?
Yes. There's a lot of information, not as lot as obviously the reef fish, but there's some nice information out there. If you do some digging, you know, you can read about this information. Now, a lot of people are saying that they can hear the reef. So when they get to a certain distance, you know, they want to be in these currents that are eventually going to bring them back to the reef. They don't want to get caught too far out that could take a long time to make their way back, you know. So a lot of people are saying that they can hear the reef. If you actually do a night dive and you turn off your light, it's actually quite noisy when you do a night dive. You can hear all the kind of critters and stuff down there. They can smell the reef, a lot of people are saying. And I think I even read somewhere that someone did a paper on anemone fish, and they said that 90% of anemone fish return back to the same area that they were actually, yeah, so, you know, it's amazing to think that these guys can make, you know, can actually make their way back. I'll tell you another thing that's super interesting was recruitment. When we've been doing these Blackwater dives, a lot of nights you'd see the same kind of fish that are coming back. When I left Palau, we had these red-toothed triggerfish, which are the small fish that are hanging around in the currents. You see them a lot swimming around. A month before I left, there was millions of them that had just come back to the reef. I'm talking about every dive site that you went, you're seeing hundreds of thousands of these little fish everywhere. Now, on one day that you went to the site, you didn't see any of these guys. And then the next day that you go to the site, you see all of them. So if you think about it, they've had to recruit at the same time back to the reef. So, you know, depending on how long their pelagic stage is, let's say 21 days, 41 days, whatever, at the same night, they have all come together and then swam back to the reef and settled back there. So that's kind of stuff just baffles me. Like, how do they know that? You know, why are they choosing these times?
That is incredible, like unbelievably incredible.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder. So Laura asks, she says, how scared were you the first time you went Blackwater diving?
Well, it took me a year to do it, so you can imagine. I have to be honest, like, you know, I like night dives, but when you're working on a liverboard and you're doing 4-day dives, doing a night dive is kind of, you know, jumping in for the 5th day of the dive. It's like, oh man, really, we're going to do this again. So it kind of took me a lot to actually want to do it, especially when I heard the idea of driving in the middle of the ocean and jumping in. I was like, you got to be nuts to want to do that. So yeah, it took me a bit of confidence to do it. But then when I had 3 or 4 other crazy people that are also up for doing it, it kind of makes you feel better. What we always do is, it's quite funny, when you throw the bars in, one of the first things that comes along are those pelagic squids that I showed swimming around the bar. Now, when they get, I don't know, they see a juvenile fish or they get scared, they ink. right? So that ink, sometimes when it starts to disperse, it looks like a huge blanket. So you'd always be looking down over the side of the boat and you'd be like, right guys, come on, let's get ready to go. And then you see this huge black cloud drift in front of the lights and you're like, was that a shark? And then you start psyching each other out. Okay, you go first. No, you go first. Okay, you go first. So, but yeah, once you get in, it's like just doing any other dive. You know, once you get in and you start descending down to those lights, everything just goes and you just get into the moment. And then, yeah, it just takes over.
Awesome. She asks also, why are the organisms transparent in the post-larval stage?
Because they live deeper, doing this, you know, mesopelagic rising to the epipelagic stuff. I think they're transparent because that gives them more of a chance of survival against predators. So yeah, I think they're using that transparency as a defense mechanism, and actually that helps them to survive, you know, in the daytime, rather than being a little fish that kind of, you know, sticks out and a predator can just attack it. It's kind of helping them to stay transparent.
Awesome. Pauline says, amazing talk, thank you. We had no idea this was even a thing. Have you ever encountered big creatures during Blackwater dives, like sharks?
Yes, Pauline, thank you for that question. Yes, we have. Now, to be honest, I think in Hawaii, they see a lot more pelagic stuff. We've definitely seen sharks when we're doing it, but not so many. You know, I think it was like maybe 40, 50, and even 100 dives before we saw a shark, because we're quite far off the reef. And I think that because we have so many lights down there, everything, you know, the sharks are like, there's no way that we're going to go near there. But now and again, you do get a couple of sharks come in, and we've had silky sharks come in, which have been quite cool. They seem to be chasing the school of squids that's going backwards and forwards. And, you know, but it's like anything, the more that you dive with those sharks during the nighttime, and depending on, of course, what their behavior is like, the safer you feel doing it. But definitely the first time we did it, we all got out of the water because we'd never kind of been on a night dive in the middle of the ocean with sharks before. So we kind of drifted away from the lights, came to the surface, and everyone was like, shall we carry on? Yeah, come on, carry on. So then we just carried on going anyway. So yeah.
Awesome. So Sue says, super interesting presentation. Do you know how the pelagic larval fish know which reef to go back to? Like, do they have some sort of homing instinct to get back to where they're from?
Thank you for that question. I have no idea how they make their way exactly back to that one area, you know, other than smelling and hearing, you know. Yeah, it amazes me to think that they can make it back to one area. So yeah, I have no other information than that. How they can, you know, how do a lot of these creatures know, like the red snappers, the bump heads, anything, how do they all know that on a full moon, on this time of day, they're going to start spawning? You know, it's just, I think that we've obviously lost that ability because we don't need it anymore, but fish obviously are still tuned into the moon and the things that we can't kind of understand.
That's really incredible. So JD says, you're a very talented photographer. Thank you for the presentation. Let me that.
Thank you very much.
And Juliana says, Richard, that was amazing and so interesting. But maybe I lost it during the speech. But how can you manage this kind of dive while drifting? It seems a little bit scary that you cannot control your group underwater while doing it.
Yeah, well, we do have, like I said, 2 guides in the water all the time. And for those people that we haven't done it before, then obviously we all use tethers. So therefore, except for the guides. So therefore, people will be tethered to the boat, and then you're just drifting with that. So, you know, there's no need to worry about your depth, only really keeping an eye on the tether that's actually attached to the boat, drifting along. But, you know, it's amazing to think how much the lights give you a reference point to your buoyancy. So as long as you can keep level with those lights that you're swimming around, then your buoyancy is always going to be kind of 12. You know, if you keep it at 12 meters, of course you can go a little bit below that or a little bit above that. You know, you can feel it in your ears as well when you start to go a little bit too deep. So, and you've always got to keep an eye on your depth. So that's the most important thing. Even if you see something like a mermaid or whatever it is super special down there, you know, you've always got to keep an eye on your depth all the time. So, and each other, you know, help each other. If you see someone going down deeper, you're going to go down to help them come a little bit back up. So, the other, it's not so much the depth. it's more keeping with the boat. The last thing that you want to do is, you know, get separated too far away from the boat, because then the whole dive is cancelled, and then, you know, everyone's coming up. So, you know, just got to constantly stay in a certain distance, and if there's too much wind or too much current, then using that line really kind of helps. If there's too much wind or current, we won't do the dive anyway. It's just too stressful.
No, exactly. So Sway asks, has anyone successfully tried Blackwater video?
Yeah, there's a lot of nice video out there that I've seen, but as you can imagine, you know, it's hard enough to get picked up. Like, imagine like trying to keep your buoyancy in the video. It's super difficult. Yeah. You know, there's ways around it. You can just, you know, shoot at a high high frame rate, so you can slow that right the way down. But yeah, doing macro and video and doing Blackwater is definitely a skill. So there's definitely people out there that are doing it, and hats off to them. It's amazing.
Oh, that's incredible. So Rose asks, for when you're shooting photos, do you set your focal point with your light before getting into the water, and just wait for something to come across that focus area?
Yeah, I basically spend a good 5 or so minutes trying to place my lights and position my lights, you know, because we've only got 60 or however many minutes down there. So you don't want to be wasting, you know, missing subjects all the time. So yeah, I spend at least 5 minutes just trying to get things in position, maybe my focus light into a certain area. I actually have kind of 2 different ways with the lights. One of the lights is looking for subjects, and the other light is actually focused on a position when I'm going to get that critter or whatever I'm taking a photo in that right position, and then moving your strobes a little bit. You know, you don't want too much backscatter. That's the thing. You know, a lot of those images, it's taken me a long time to get that backscatter out. And so the more experience that you get, obviously depending on the situation, sometimes there's lots of backscatter in the water. You can't do much about that. But just trying to take as many photos and get your lights exactly in that position, which means that you don't have to spend hours editing later on.
I find that too, like with Blackwater, like not just the backscatter, but just the amount of life that's actually in the water and everything that can be up there, that like a lot of times, you know, you've got your focus light on and they start getting attracted to the focus light, and then all of a sudden you've got like a ball of creatures like around your focus light, you know, and so you're trying to shoot through that and trying to, you know, turn the focus light, move out of the way to get them to go that way, or, you know, and start again. And there's so many moving parts and things going on to deal with and work through. Yeah,
exactly. And the more you do it, you know, you get used to just, you know, like especially with the bonfire stuff, which is a bit closer to the reef, you know, sometimes you'll get a lot more, let's say, life, but it's, you know, tiny little organisms, things in the water that you don't necessarily get on the open ocean stuff, which can be difficult to work with at times. You know, it's bringing in more things to probably eat on that, but it can also make it difficult because that stuff is in your image. So, you know, you maybe need to turn your lights off for a few seconds to let that disperse and then turn them back on, maybe position your strobes a little bit differently, or maybe even just move away from the lights and try to find, you know, hopefully that those things that are following you will obviously go somewhere else. So, you know.
Yeah, I found that for me, like when we were with the bonfire stuff, is just moving towards away from the lights in general and getting out to the outer edges and everything like that. You start to clear up, but then you also get, like you said, like some of the critters are just more attracted to the light, so they're in that, you know, nest of thousands of animals.
I mean, a lot of things, like you said, are hanging on just the outskirts of that beam, you know, like they're a little bit scared, so they don't want to be in the light too much. They're hanging around out there. So when I'm doing these dives, I'm constantly swimming around to that outer, you know, skirt, or just where that beam is just dropping off, looking for subjects out there, coming back, looking for things in the light, moving out as well, you know, and constantly like moving around trying to find subjects.
No, awesome. Frida asks, are you working with colleagues or taxonomists to do any species identification? And are you interested in the scientists area?
Yes, I definitely am. And sometime in the beginning, when we weren't seeing much, or we weren't understanding much of what we were seeing, I was getting all excited, you know, and I contacted a higher up guy in Australia, Jerry, I think his name was, and, you know, I was going on about all this stuff, and he was really, really keen to help, but also, you know, he was also saying you need to make an effort and try to identify what you're seeing as well. You know, don't just send us all this information of what you're seeing. So then we started to learn a little bit more about what we're doing and what we're seeing. So the answer to that question is I'm not working with 1 or 2 people specifically, but I am seeing a lot of information, or they've wrote a book on something and I'm kind of, you know, learning from what they've published, or even seeing there's a lot of work out on Instagram now from a lot of great photographers. A lot of these guys, you know, have got the research as well, so you can kind of label stuff according to what they've seen.
Awesome. I mean, I would love to see someone eventually to come out with like a Blackwater ID book, you know what I mean, like or an ID website or app or something, because it's just so, I don't know, it's really hard. I can't imagine the difficulty of trying to identify some of the critters and everything like that. Is like, it was clear and round and small, and like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, there's so hard to really start to narrow it down like you would with like a normal fish or anything, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And the more you do it, the better you can kind of get at IDing stuff, because you'd seen it before. But in the beginning, you're like, oh, that's a juvenile yellowfin tuna. And, you know, obviously it's nothing close. But, you know, you're getting excited of something groundbreaking scientifically, you know, that no one's seen before.
Yeah, that's awesome. So one last question. Ali asks, have you ever discovered any new species?
No, I have not discovered any new species on the Blackwater that I know of. I got very excited when we saw the paper Nautilus, because we were definitely the first people to see that in Palau. Nice. Now people are seeing it in Anilau and Indo like regularly, because there's a season for it. A lot of these things have seasons, so they're seeing a lot of them. But at the time, you know, I was like, yes, this is amazing. Hardly any people have taken photos of this. And now you look at it, there's just lots of them everywhere. That generally happens, I think, on most things. So during a Blackwater, so far that I know of, I have never seen anything that is scientifically new.
Awesome. Well, man, thank you so much for stopping by today and everything like that. Thanks for taking the time to teach us about Blackwater.
Thanks, man. Thank you so much for inviting me on here to talk about this, and all the viewers and people that have tuned in as well. Thanks a lot for coming out and hearing us talk about something that we love doing. And yeah, really appreciate it. So thank you very much.
Cool. Awesome, brother. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Tomorrow morning, we're back with Romina to look at macro life in Indonesia, as well as some macro photography tips and anything like that. Saturday, we've got a coral reef conservation course coming up. Still a couple spots left on that, and an equipment specialist on Sunday. So get ready. Have a good weekend. We'll see you tomorrow and all that, and see you next week too for Shark Week. Ellen's back tomorrow. She'll be hosting tomorrow, so we'll see her, and I will see you guys on Monday. Have a great weekend, Richard. Thank you, brother. Hope to see you very soon down here in Baja.
Take care. You know that,
Take care, guys. Thank you.